Colleagues, welcome back to the afternoon session of day one of our 129th Congress. We will begin the session with a short film outlining the STUC's demands for the Scottish Parliament election. Hopefully.
We all feel like things are getting harder. Our way of life is under attack. And our politicians seem to be unable, or even worse, unwilling, to make things better. And that cannot continue. Power concedes nothing without a demand. Never has, never will. We've seen a massive transfer of wealth and power to a tiny minority of the population who want to dictate the way the rest of us live. They want us to subsidise their luxurious way of life by cutting our wages, forcing us into insecure jobs, skimming off the top of public services, driving up the cost of living. And when they fail, it's us that picks up the tab. But here's the thing. We don't answer to them, they answer to us. For more than 120 years, trade union members have fought and won countless campaigns that have improved the lives of working class people. Aye, our members, not just the backbone of the country, but its beating heart. If politicians want to create a wealthier nation, they must look after its workers. Unions fought for this parliament, and it's time that those politicians within it fought for us. We need proper investment in our public services. No more of this tinkering around the edges. We deserve nothing less than we're worth, and that means bringing public services under public control, where they're run by us, for us. Work should provide dignity, not just a struggle to survive. We need to have the right to negotiate pay, terms and conditions for everyone, to social care, to hospitality, to the creative industries. And we need to stop subsidising businesses that steal from our communities and start rewarding fair work. Public money should only go to companies that provide secure, well-paid, unionised jobs. And we need a real industrial strategy. For far too long, our communities have borne the brunt of reckless deindustrialisation. So let's lay the foundations for investment, growth and prosperity. Let's build our own ferries in Scottish yards. Let's take a public stake in our natural resources so the profits stay here, lowering our bills and creating jobs. And let's fund municipal bus companies and public rail that serve people, not shareholders.
We know Scotland can be fixed. And it's down to us working class people to fight tooth and nail for a country that works for us, not billionaires. Any politician that wants our vote at this election must heed our demands and put in place the changes needed to reinvigorate the economy and deliver the dignity we've earned.
But ultimately, it's down to us, trade unions in our communities and workplaces, to force the change our class demands. Nothing less will do. Workers demand better.
So how good was that? Yeah, that was really good. And I'd like to say thank you to Crawford, who was the actor in that, who I think sneaked into the room to watch, but I now have to ask you to leave. Congress, we will now move to section 6 of the agenda on public services, and I now call motion 39, Royal Observatory Edinburgh and UK ATC, and invite Prospect to move the motion.
Good afternoon.
Just wait a minute, colleague. There's a point of order. Do you want to come to the front and raise your point of order, please? Have you waved that away then, so it's not a point of order anymore? Okay. Colleague, you can start your speech. Sorry to do that to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. I am William Cochrane from Prospect Union, and I am a first-time delegate and a first-time speaker. Thank you. So please do forgive me if I stumble on my words as I fight down the nerves and present this motion. The Royal Observatory of Edinburgh is home to the UK Astronomy Technology Centre. That is a national laboratory and is part of the Science and Technology Facilities Council, a public body that is responsible for UK research activities in astronomy, space science, particle physics and nuclear physics. It is part of UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, a non-departmental body under the UK Government's Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. The UKTC is one of UKRI's largest and the only STFC site in Scotland. It is a unique and world-leading facility, delivering cutting-edge astronomy instrumentation, research and public engagement for Scotland and the UK. The UKTC was responsible for leading the development of the MIRI instrument that is doing science on the renowned James Webb Space Telescope, and this year we are responsible for the delivery of MOONS, the UK's largest astronomical instrument ever built. Our work is a key part of allowing the UK's membership to the European Southern Observatory to be a net benefit to the UK, with every £1 of investment resulting in £2 of return. The jobs at this site are therefore incredibly valuable to the local economy and to Scotland's contribution to international astronomy. However, recently, STFC has announced plans to cut its spending on national labs by 15% and project grants by 30%, a move which the Royal Astronomical Society has said will be a catastrophe for science, and it has been publicly stated that there will be job losses in STFC. These cuts will not fall equally across STFC. They pose a significant threat to the long-term sustainability of the UKTC and the jobs and training it provides, and it jeopardises the UK's ability to lead major international astronomy projects. I am therefore here asking this Congress to call on the UK Government, UKRI and STFC to provide sustainable, real terms, protected funding for curiosity-driven research, national labs and research institutes, and explicitly safeguard the long-term future of the Royal Observatory of Edinburgh and UK's ATC. I also ask that the General Council works with affiliated unions, the Scottish Government, universities and civil society to campaign for a long-term research and innovation strategy, a strategy that secures high-skilled jobs, skills pipelines and public engagement at the Royal Observatory of Edinburgh and comparable facilities in Scotland. Finally, I ask that the General Council supports union members at the UKTC and STFC and related institutions in organising collectively, including through coordinated bargaining and political campaigning to defend jobs and shape decisions on the future of the site. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks, William. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Formally? Thank you, colleagues. No other speakers, so that was motion 39, Royal Observatory, Edinburgh and the UK ATC. The General Council is recommending support. I'm now going to go to the vote. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Motion 39, Royal Observatory, Edinburgh and UK ATC is carried. Thank you very much. Just bear with us a minute. Okay, in the absence of our speaker, I'm going to call Composite A, Public Services, covering amended motions 2 and 35, and motions 33 and 38. And sorry, Ruby, I didn't give you any advance notice of this. I call Ruby Alden Gibson from the General Council to move the composite motion. Sorry, comrade.
Thanks, President. Congress, Ruby Gibson, moving Composite A on public services on behalf of the General Council. Congress, as we debate these motions, people are dying waiting for hospital appointments, patients are left in corridors for 12 hours, and nurses are working those same 12 hours without a break. Our carers, who support the most vulnerable people in society and give them dignity and respect, are being paid an absolute pittance for work that would break most people. Scotland's teachers are reporting that they simply don't have enough time to do their jobs properly, and amongst this are increasingly being attacked by children who are being let down by the lack of additional support they need. Scotland's colleges and universities are continually being cut, and staff are being handed redundancy notices while politicians talk about world-class education. For Scotland's fire service, they have lost over 1,200 jobs since 2013. Today, across Scotland, up to 200 fire engines are unavailable every day because of crew shortages. Response times have gone up by 90 seconds on average, but in many cases much longer than this. That extra 90 seconds can be the difference between life and death. Congress, we applaud the Scottish Fire Service and the FBU for their heroic efforts to save the building on Union Street in Glasgow last month. That fire is a reminder that when the worst happens, we need our fire service to have enough people and resources to do their job. And it doesn't stop there. For civil servants, workloads continue to rise with the expectations and political ambitions of Scottish ministers. The same ministers who rely on their expertise but are happy to scapegoat them to pander to the right-wing press. For councils, libraries keep closing, swimming pools keep closing, community centres keep closing, council budgets just keep getting smaller, and communities become more fragmented and more disconnected. It is nothing short of a miracle what public sector workers have been achieving since austerity-driven budget cuts began. For 16 years they have been doing more with less, and it begs the question, when does this stop? When does it get better? Because right now it is only getting worse. And who's to blame for this? Ask COSLA and public sector employers, they blame the Scottish Government. Ask the Scottish Government, they blame the UK Government. Ask the UK Government, and they blame the last one, and sometimes they even blame us. Congress, they are all to blame for accepting the logic of austerity and for treating public services as costs to be cut rather than the backbone of a fair society. The Scottish Government has revealed its answer to the sorry state of affairs. Their solution is the Public Service Reform Strategy, which aims to deliver £1 billion of cuts a year and to slash over 10,000 jobs. The Scottish Government claims that these cuts are necessary to address the £4.7 billion deficit they expect to have by 2029-30. Congress, this is not reform, it's cuts dressed up as reform, and it is not necessary. What it really means is fewer workers doing more services shoved online, more decisions and money handed to consultants and tech companies. Do you know who never gets the blame for how bad things are for so many people? The money-hungry, super-rich that profits from our public services and from the misery I have just spoken about. Research shows that £16 billion of our tax money is going to private companies in Scotland, and outrageously, up to £3 billion of that money, again, our tax money, is what they take in profits. No one should be profiting from our taxes. Scotland's people should not be going to work and paying their taxes only for them to be used to line the pockets of the super rich. This isn't money they have earned. It's made off the backs of our members who go to their work every day, and it needs to stop. Congress, Scotland's public services don't need reformed, they need to recover. They need investment that's not just enough to patch up the latest crisis, but enough to plan, to train, to build teams, and to keep skilled workers in jobs. We should never let any government tell us that this isn't possible, because it is. The solution to the investment needed for recovery of our public services lies in stopping the outrageous situation of our taxes being given to private companies and the super rich. The investment we need is there. It's in the contracts handed out to outsourcing giants. It's also in the wealth of those who have done very well out of the last decade while our services have been crumbling. It's in the land and property that has been allowed to sit as an asset on a balance sheet instead of serving our communities. The super rich and big corporations have been told for years that there is one rule for them and another for everyone else. That needs to stop. That means serious action on tax avoidance and evasion, bringing in progressive wealth and land taxes, and finally binning the unfair and outdated council tax system. The Scottish Government needs to stop pretending its hands are tied. It needs to actually start using the powers that they are elected to use. Congress, we can have more teachers, more nurses, more firefighters. We can have the public services that people deserve. We've spent years demanding this, and it's time that the Scottish Government takes action. Congress, I move.
Thank you, Ruby. So, what we're going to do, because this is an important motion and deserves an appropriate amount of time to run through and allow delegates and affiliates to speak on it, I'm going to invite Anas to address us, and then we'll go back to the motion and have that full debate. So we'll now move to an address by Anas Sarwar to Congress. This will be followed by 3 questions from the General Counsel. Can I ask those who have been selected to ask questions on behalf of the General Counsel to come and wait by the side of the rostrum? Anas has been MSP for Glasgow since 2016, having previously served as the MP for Glasgow Central. During that period, he served as Scottish Labour's Deputy Leader, and he has been leader of the Scottish Labour Party since his election in 2021. Anas, I'm pleased to invite you to address our Congress.
Friends, thank you so much for that very warm welcome to Congress. We have, of course, just over 2 weeks of campaigning left until the election on May the 7th. And although I've been travelling across the country, I was determined, as I always do, to make sure that I took up the invitation to come and speak with you all today. Because, friends, everyone in this room, of course, knows all too well the historic links between the trade union movement and the Labour Party. But let me say unequivocally that the Labour Party has been and always will be the political wing of the trade union movement. We are there to stand up and represent your voices and make sure we deliver for working people. And I am really proud that this manifesto, our programme, has been designed in partnership with our affiliated trade unions. And it reflects the very best of the Labour family coming together to put together those ideas to transform and change Scotland. And I'm really proud that it was backed unanimously by our party. It's a manifesto by working people, for working people, all who have been failed for far too long by the SNP. And at the Holyrood election on May the 7th, we will have the first real opportunity in a generation to vote for change in Scotland, to vote for a Scottish Labour government that will prioritise a growth that is shared and that is fairly distributed. And as your First Minister, I pledge to work tirelessly to make life more affordable for hard-working families across Scotland. And I get that the most pressing issues for families are those struggling to pay their bills and those worried about every trip to the filling station, which fills most drivers with dread. So let me start today by taking a moment to address the international context. The illegal actions of Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump are, of course, a risk to lives in the Middle East, but also to livelihoods across the globe. And I think it is really, really important that this STUC Congress sends a unanimous message to all those who seek to divide us and spread their hate, that the wars must end, that we must see peace for the people of Ukraine, that we must see peace in the Middle East, and yes, that includes a free and secure Palestine alongside a free and secure Israel. And it also means all those who have committed these war crimes in Gaza, in Ukraine, must pay the full price for their actions at the International Criminal Court and at the International Court for Justice. But I also want to make a further commitment. If the war or the instability continues, then as First Minister, I will act. That is why I have announced a £100 million emergency package of support, which, if the war and the instability continues, will come into force. That package will include loans for energy-intensive businesses to protect jobs. It will mean bulk buying fuel so we can drive down prices at the pumps. It will mean crisis grants and loans for households. It will mean an emergency summit of our supermarkets so we can drive down prices of staple items. And it will also mean redeploying our civil service so we can make sure people are getting the help they need and they deserve. I will never let Scots pay the price for the illegal actions of Netanyahu, Trump or Putin, and we should say that loudly and clearly across the country. Real action to help people right now, not just simply looking for someone else to blame, which is far too often the instinct of this SNP government. I also want to address some of what I feel like is gimmicks in this election campaign when people need real delivery, a real focus on delivering for the hard-working majority. Some of you will remember the promise at the last election of a free iPad and a free bike for all of Scotland's young people, a promise not delivered. And now you see the promise of free crayons and free colouring pencils, when in actual fact what we are promising to deliver is real action to make sure every young person thrives, with 1,500 new classroom assistants, 2,000 new teachers and a catch-up on literacy and numeracy. That's the kind of change our children need in this country. Because this election is a chance to move on from 20 years of the SNP. But let me just speak about one other issue first. Look, I will always be proud of the fact that Scotland led the way in getting rid of a Tory government that had done so much damage to this country for 14 years. And it's because Scotland helped get rid of the Tories that we were able to deliver a new deal for working people, a record increase in the minimum wage, finally banning exploitative zero-hour contracts, £12 billion more to spend on Scotland's public services, as well as secure shipbuilding on the Clyde for a generation. But I also know that people have frustrations and disappointments, and I share them. There have been many good things, but also too many mistakes. So let me be clear. A vote for Scottish Labour in this election is not an endorsement of Keir Starmer. It's about who is First Minister. It's not about 2 years of a Labour government, but 20 years of an SNP government. It's not about a protest. It's about delivering the change that working people in Scotland need right now. Because for far too long, Scotland has focused on what we can't do instead of focusing on what is possible. That's why a Scottish Labour government will use all the levers at our disposal to unlock our country's huge economic potential. That will mean speeding up our planning process so we can build 125,000 new homes, yes, to create jobs, but also to help end homelessness and eradicate rough sleeping in our country once and for all. But we will also make sure that we recognise that there's more than one right path for our amazing young people. So we will maintain free university tuition, but we will go further. We will deliver 9,000 new apprenticeships so young Scots can get the skills they need and they can find work. We will invest in our colleges by setting up an apprenticeship centres of excellence so young people have a route into the well-paid jobs of the future. We will also end the SNP's block on new clean nuclear energy, and in that process unlock billions of pounds of investment into Scotland, help create thousands of new jobs and help ensure energy security. And we will finally, far too late, but finally, deliver the fight for 15 to make sure we pay our care workers £15 an hour. And unlike the SNP, we will deliver a national care service, joining forces with our trade unions to improve terms and conditions across the social care sector. And crucially, we will revise Scottish Government procurement rules to build and buy here in Scotland. So as First Minister, I will scrap the SNP's irrational policy of sending public contracts abroad. Because right now we have buses built in China, ferries built in Turkey, and wind turbines shipped halfway across the world from Indonesia. I want those Scottish contracts to be in Scotland so we can end that national embarrassment that is all too often the hallmark of this SNP government. So this election is about whether you want an SNP government that after 20 years has lost its way, or a Scottish Labour government that has a coherent industrial strategy to create jobs and prosperity, to grow our economy and to make life more affordable. And I will work in partnership with the people who truly power our economy. That's the workers who know what needs to be done to drive our country forward. I will be a First Minister who works to find solutions, not to drive our communities apart. And you know, every day of this election campaign, John Swinney has talked about a government somewhere else, not the issues that are affecting people in the here and now. He's been desperately trying to deflect from the SNP's appalling record in government that he's been at the heart of for 2 decades. But let me also address a different kind of poison in our politics. Reform. Their strategy is to divide us, to make unrealistic tax pledges, and to say they will scrap all the new protections for workers that people in Scotland help deliver. So let me be clear about Nigel Farage's reform and Lord Malcolm Offord. Nigel Farage doesn't understand Scotland, he doesn't care about Scotland, and he couldn't give a damn about Scotland. In many ways, they're the same old Tories, different team, same badge, the people who screwed this country before, who want the opportunity to screw it again. And what about Lord Malcolm Offord? Well, he was the guy that was the cheerleader for Margaret Thatcher, who was the advisor to Ian Duncan Smith and worked in the governments of both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. The idea now that he wants to pretend that he's the great defender of working class communities is frankly an insult. And let's not forget, this is the party that spent tens of thousands of pounds on racist ads questioning my loyalty to Scotland. So now in their desperation, the SNP claim that the very people running those ads are the ones that somehow I am going to do a deal with. Even the idea is offensive. So let me make it unequivocal. We will reject the poison of reform in this election because people in Scotland have seen their like before and rejected them, and I have no doubt that they will do the same again on the 7th of May. The only people I'm interested in making a deal with is the great people of this country, Scotland. So friends, if we are to defeat the poison of reform, then you all know this from your own workforces, from within your own trade unions, that we do have to confront the issues that reform use to divide us. And I honestly believe that having a change that brings our country together is what's crucially important. Because I honestly do believe that Scotland's best days lie ahead of us. And I'm committed to build a better future, not by dividing our communities, but by bringing our communities together in common purpose to deliver for our country. So I will lead a Scottish Government that gets the basics right, that protects the hard-won rights of working people, that protects the most vulnerable in our communities, that sets up breakfast clubs in every school so no child starts a school day hungry, that ends the scandal of 10,000 children across Scotland who have no place to call home, and we will lift over 100,000 children out of poverty. After 20 years of SNP government, people are entitled to ask a very simple question. If they were going to fix it, why haven't they done it by now? So I will start by fixing the mess the SNP have made, but I want to go further. As First Minister, I will save our NHS, working with its frontline staff so it's there when people need it and delivers for patients now and for the future. I will introduce a new train here, stay here policy so our NHS doesn't lose newly qualified doctors, dentists and nurses to other countries. I will also abolish unfair business rates to help reinvigorate our high streets, make them thriving places again, and make sure the online giants like Amazon finally pay their fair share. I will put bus services back under public control and deliver faster intercity travel on our rail networks. We will also set up a new relationship with our councils. So we will give councils assurances over long-term funding so they can plan improvements in their communities rather than be asked to do more and more with less and less. And our £350 million pothole fund will also fix the shocking state of our roads and repair over 5 million potholes. Because Scotland is a country of talent, compassion, innovation and ambition. We have everything except a government prepared to match the potential of our people. But I can promise you this isn't as good as it gets. I will work with you in the trade union movement and your members to deliver a better future for everyone in Scotland. So the choice we face on May the 7th is more of the same or real change with Scottish Labour. Because only Scottish Labour can reject the poison of reform, beat the SNP, change Scotland and build a better future for working Scots. Because ultimately that's the choice. It'll be either myself or John Swinney as First Minister after the election. You have given John Swinney and the SNP 20 years. Give me 5. In those 5 years, I will demonstrate that we can fix the mess, we can get the basics right, and we can make life more affordable. So I humbly ask, please look at the state facing our country. Accept this is not as good as it gets. Let's give hope at a time of despair for so many. Let's choose change, vote for change, and let's deliver that better future together. Thank you.
Thank you, Anas. If you could stay at the lectern while colleagues come forward. So whoever has question 1, if you would come to the rostrum.
Mark Ferguson, Unison Scotland, on behalf of the General Council. Labour's manifesto and its promises improvements in public services, including health, social care, education and housing. However, also commit to no new income tax rises, revenue neutral changes in business rates and an ambition to reduce tax rates over the lifetime of this Parliament. With public opinion firmly behind tax rises for the wealthy, with 5 families in Scotland controlling more than 25% of the wealth, why are you prioritising tax cuts over investment in our public services, and how will you raise the money you have committed to spend? Thank you.
Mark, thank you. Mark, thank you for that question. We have very deliberately in our manifesto only chosen to make promises that we know are within the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament, because I want to be upfront and real about what we can deliver here in Scotland and the different outcomes we can have. That's why our manifesto does include a more fair tax system, for example, fairly taxing Amazon, an online giant that is eating up our town centres and our high streets. It's why it does include commitments to close tax loopholes that exist currently for Airbnbs and short-term lets, so people who are currently avoiding paying business rates or council tax, leaving our public services shortchanged. We're also looking at introducing a surcharge for those who don't live in the UK but look to buy property here in the UK, and in Scotland making it unavailable for many of the communities who live in Scotland. Our island communities in particular feel that challenge. And unashamedly, we will back, when there is windfalls, a windfall tax on the oil and gas giants, because right now I think it's unfair that we have a situation where other political parties think that if you earn £33,500, you somehow have the broadest shoulders in this country, so therefore should pay more tax. But somehow if you're the oil and gas giants who are making record profits because of the illegal actions of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, that somehow they should pay less in tax. So we will always take a balanced approach. And let me just finally say on those public services, we have detailed commitments on how we ramp up spending, for example, in our National Health Service, particularly to do the catch-up on our waiting lists, how we properly fund social care and have the step-down beds so we can help eradicate delayed discharge, how we recruit the 1,500 additional support need teachers and 2,000 specialist teachers with the £630 million of consequentials that are coming from the SEND proposals elsewhere. So every manifesto commitment in this is fully costed and can be delivered. The point we make about the growth target in this is if we're able to meet that growth target, we will use the fruits of that growth to go even beyond what is committed in this manifesto and making sure we have a tax system that works for working people. But thank you so much for the question.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Hi there, Paul Watson from Usdaw on behalf of the General Council. And as some voters have lost faith in politicians and political institutions, especially at a local level where divisions in communities are increasing and gaps in services are quite clearly very visible. You've promised a Local Democracy Act, potentially delivering regional mayors. The question is, will another layer of government bureaucracy not just take up vital resources? And why do you think this will make any difference to working class families who are suffering at the cost of living crisis? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Well, I think the important point to make here is about outcomes rather than model. And the example I often use is if you look at what's happening in the Greater Manchester Authority. Now, that system largely works because it's really driven by Andy Burnham and the Mayor's team and working in partnership with the local authorities. And, you know, if the outcomes are the same but a different model, fine. I just want different outcomes. Because the different outcomes meant that even though we had a Tory government, the metro region of Manchester was still able to attract investment. It was still able to get homelessness down. It was still able to build more homes. It was still able to get its bus services into public control, and it was still able to buy its buses from the UK rather than get contracts going elsewhere. And that's the kind of approach I think we need in Scotland. One is a fair funding settlement for local government. That's why the Local Democracy Act will make sure it's a legal obligation on a Scottish Government that if its budget goes up, of course excluding consequentials that are meant to be for the health service, there should be a similar increase for local government because so many of the priorities are delivered by our council colleagues. But secondly, it's a recognition that the one-size-fits-all system for Scotland is not fit for purpose. What the economic model is for Glasgow and the West will be different for Edinburgh and the Lothians, will be different for the Highlands and the Islands, and it'll be different for the south of Scotland. And just think of the potential of regional partnership if we can get transport, regional economic development, our colleges and universities, as well as our enterprise agencies, all working together to maximise the outcomes for working people in our regions. So it's the outcomes that I'm interested in rather than the model. And what the Local Democracy Act does is give the power to regions to find a model that works for them to get those outcomes.
Thanks, Anas. And the last question, please.
The best for last.
Undoubtedly.
Question to you, Anas. Scotland has heard years of promises about industrial strategy, while public contracts, skilled jobs and apprenticeships continue to be sent elsewhere. GMB Scotland has been clear that procurement must stop being driven by the lowest cost alone and must be instead deliver jobs, skills and social value here in Scotland. As First Minister, what specific changes would you make to procurement policy, alongside the use of public ownership to ensure Scottish public money supports Scottish manufacturing, strengthens Scottish supply chains and prevents jobs being sent overseas? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, there's two really important parts to that question. First of all is we have to make sure in all of our local procurement we add a social value clause so we can drive up the benefits for individual local communities and for individual businesses that exist here in Scotland. That's absolutely what we'll do. And I just don't think it's acceptable to say that it's fair enough for us to send, for example, bus contracts to China when we have a bus manufacturer here that then goes on a week later to shed jobs. I just don't think that is fair and it's not right. Secondly, if you look at our shipbuilding industry, whilst it's not directly a procurement issue, it is a skills issue, is because of a failure to invest in shipbuilding skills and defence skills. If you look at what's happening in Rosyth or you look at what's happening on the Clyde, around a third of its workforce at any given time is people on short-term contracts coming either from Eastern Europe or the Philippines, and the average salary is around £40,000 to £60,000. If we could have skill centres on the Clyde, at Rosyth, giving our young people in this country those skills, that is transformational for them as individuals, but transformational for their families and those communities if we are going to drive down poverty. And the third point is about community ownership. Is we have so many assets that exist, not just in terms of the energy generation, but also the components that go towards that energy generation, as well as the energy distribution. We also have other huge assets if you think about district heating systems as a model. Why can't we have a redefinition of what it means for community ownership and community benefit? Because right now, if I'm honest, I don't think an energy company handing out some contracts to some grants to third sector organisations meets the threshold of genuine community benefit and community ownership. We've already had a question about local government. If our regions and our local authorities had shares in local assets that generate a receipt, they could then use them, for example, to fund social care packages in this country. So I want us to redefine what community benefit and community ownership in this country is. So yes, we generate wealth in this country, but we make sure that wealth is used for the benefit of people in this country and then generates opportunities for all of Scotland's amazing young people and communities. Thank you all so much for the questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Anas, for taking the time to join us. There's a small gift. Colleagues, can I call those speakers who hadn't spoken in Composite A back to the front? Whilst those colleagues are taking their places, I'm able to report the outcome of the card vote on Motion 1, Constitutional Amendment. Votes in favour, 1,065. Votes against, 119. Abstentions, 9. That's an 89.95% majority, and so therefore Motion 1, Constitutional Amendment, is carried. Colleagues, can I now call Unison to second the composite motion?
Congress, Mark Ferguson, Unison Scotland, seconding Composite A. Public services are essential for a stable, healthy, educated and safe society and provide a good basis for community cohesion. Is it any wonder that we see the rise of the reform in the far right, when our political parties have let our communities down, the people of Scotland down, time after time, by not investing in their public services and filling the pockets of the privateers and the back of our services? The biggest disgrace this year was that the Scottish budget nodded through with no opposition. A budget and a commitment given under public reform that will take away 15,000 to 20,000 jobs across the public sector. Unison calls for this, we call for progressive taxation, taxation that delivers, taxation that funds the public services we need. To cut taxation only cuts tax for the rich. We need to address this atrocity. It's private greed that has caused the problem to our public services. We need our services brought back in-house. We need to deliver them through public ownership. Unison has launched its manifesto, Public Services at the Heart of a Fairer Scotland. The political parties don't need to write manifestos. If they take what's in this composite, they take our manifesto and implement it, they're on the right track to put Scotland back on track for a country of prosperity and a country for the people. This Scottish Parliament election gives us an opportunity in the trade union movement. It gives us an opportunity to raise awareness of public services, to force the candidates who are standing to deliver for the people of Scotland. We are the movement that stood firm in support of public services. These parties have let us down time and time again, and we call upon them now to change track, to make sure that they deliver for the people who elect them. That's what they're there for, and they should be reminded of that. Congress, please support the composite.
Thanks, Mark. Now call GMB to speak in support of the composite motion.
President, Congress, Annette Riley, GMB Scotland, supporting Composite A. Congress, this composite gets to the heart of the crisis facing people, public services in Scotland, because it starts from the truth. Our public services are in trouble because they have been starved of money, stretched beyond reason and expected to carry out regardless. That is the reality of our members see every day in councils, in care, in schools and across public sector. Our members are the people holding these services together. They see the shortages, they see the vacancies that go unfilled, they see the pressure of piling on workers who are already doing more than they should reasonably be expected to do. They see the growing gap between what workers are asked to deliver and what governments are prepared to fund. They know that when services start to fail, it is workers and communities who are blamed first, not the political choices that created the problem. This composite gets that reality right. It is right to say that local government is crisis. It is right to say that social care is under a huge strain. It is right to say that schools are carrying growing needs with too few staff and too little support. And it is right to challenge the failed model of outsourcing, fragmentation and managed decline that helped get us there. Congress, public services do not fail because workers are asking for too much. They fail because ministers promise more than they can fund and then expect workers and communities to absorb the consequences that we have seen too much of that already. Too often, governments cut, centralise, outsource and automate and then call it reform. That is not reform. And too often, when the crisis becomes impossible to hide, support staff, care workers and public sector workers are treated as though they are the cost to be contained rather than the people making services function. This composite takes the right line. It backs insourcing, it backs fair funding, it backs workforce planning, it backs sectorial bargaining in social care. It recognises that services are only as strong as the workers delivering them. It's the exact right approach. Congress, the answer to failing public services is not more of the same. It's investment, it's proper staffing, it's democratic control, it's respect for the workforce. Workers shouldn't be made scapegoats for the crisis that they did not create. Please support the composite.
Thank you, Annette. Now call any SUWT to speak in support of the composite motion.
Congress President Mike Corbett, National Official for NASUWT, the Teachers' Union, speaking in support of Composite A on public services. Sometimes it's hard to remember Congress when you have a Labour government that's acting like the Tories by limiting the right to protest and persecuting immigrants, trans people and others, that we had to endure 14 years of terrible Tory government before that. 14 years. That began with Cameron, Osborne and Clegg trumpeting the need for austerity policies that we were supposedly all in it together. When we know the reality, they have personally enriched themselves and their pals while the rest of us have had to suffer. Let me remind you, the top 1% of earners in the UK have tripled their wealth since 2010. Tripled their wealth. They can afford to give plenty of that back to wider society, and they should be made to. One of the key areas which has suffered since 2010 is public services, which have been starved of funding, leading to a crisis affecting those services, the staff delivering them, and the wider population that needs them. And let's be clear, austerity, regrettably, has continued under a Labour government. The year-on-year, real terms cuts in the funding of public services impact adversely on children's life chances, community living standards, morale and well-being. There remain significant waiting lists for healthcare, and despite some signs of modest improvements, these remain far higher than pre-pandemic. There are significant links between health and education funding, and that reduced access to medical pathways, longer waiting lists, and reductions in community health care have had detrimental impacts on teachers being able to maintain employment and pupils securing the necessary medical support to succeed. Some teaching still takes place in crumbling buildings. Teachers have still not had their pay restored properly. Education support staff are paid a pittance, or worse, are told their jobs are being cut. To tell the truth, Congress, it's amazing that schools have managed to maintain a successful education system in the face of that ongoing austerity. Let's not forget, Congress, that while £5 to £6 billion apparently is lost each year to benefit fraud, 35 to 40 billion, that's 7 or 8 times as much, is lost to tax evasion and avoidance. But what do Lord Robertson and others choose to focus upon? the welfare system and its supposed excesses, while he and his chums in the House of Lords take all they can from the gravy train. And in response to those who claim there's no simple source of the additional funding that public services so desperately need, let's tax the billionaires. Let's remember, a billion is 1,000 million. A billionaire is a millionaire 1,000 times over. They'll not be able to spend that vast wealth in their lifetime, so let's make them give some of it back to help wider society. Please, Congress, support this motion and let's see our public services restored to their former glory.
Thank you, Mike. Now call on Unite to speak in support of the composite motion.
Thank you. Brian Robertson, Unite the Union, speaking in favour of Composite A public services. Congress, local government is not some distant layer of bureaucracy. It's the school that your child walks into every morning. It's this building. It's owned by Dundee Council. It's the care worker who looks after your parents. It's the waste worker keeping your streets clean, emptying your bins. It's the library, the park, housing. I could go on and on about the hundreds of vital services that local government delivers. It's the backbone of Scotland, and right now that backbone is breaking. For years, Unite and our sister unions have been pointing to services struggling, and after years of austerity, after years of cuts, Scotland's councils are now in absolute crisis. Services are stretched to breaking point, workers are exhausted, and communities have been asked to do more with less. We've heard that lots, haven't we? Let's be clear, this was not inevitable. This is the result of choices. Choices to underfund local government, choices to centralise power, choices to squeeze councils while demand rises and expectations grow, as well as needs. In Congress, we have been saying this far too long. That's why we have launched Unite's Fair Funding for Scotland's Councils campaign. We'll come back to that in a second. We say, scrap the council tax system that is outdated and regressive and replace it with something fairer. Give councils real financial stability with long-term funding, multi-year settlements and proper planning. Stop pressing councils into short-term cuts and start funding services based on the needs of our communities. And crucially, we say, bring services back in-house. Because outsourcing has been a disaster. It has drained billions from the public purse, it has driven down pay and conditions, and it has handed our essential services to profiteers whose only interest is extracting value, not delivering it. Congress, public services should serve the public, not private profit. And when councils are properly funded, when services are brought back in-house, when workers are valued and supported, everything improves. Service quality improves, workforce stability improves, communities thrive. But when councils are starved of funding, class sizes rise, care standards fall, bins go uncollected, facilities close, and inequality deepens. And into that vacuum steps division, because when services are scarce, when people feel abandoned, it creates the conditions where anger grows and where that anger can be misdirected and exploited by the far right. We cannot allow underfunding to fuel division. Final part. The answer to scarcity is not blame, the answer is investment. So Congress, this motion is about more than budgets. It's about the kind of country we want to live in. Do we want communities with strong, properly funded public services, or do we accept decline, fragmentation and privatisation? Unite's answer is this: fund councils fairly, end outsourcing, invest in our communities, and you will see in your seats, on your tables, there's
Brian,
a QR code on this.
Now.
Please use that and please support the motion. Thank you.
Thanks, comrade. I call the EIS, please, to speak in support.
President, Congress, Sean McNamara from the EIS speaking in support of this motion. 2 years ago, I attended my first STUC Congress in this hall. I found it deeply powerful to hear from comrades across the workforce and their various struggles to protect workers and to provide for the community. It served as a welcome reminder that despite approaching the struggle from separate unions, our fights are irrevocably interlinked. In the EIS, we see how children in our care are set at a disadvantage due to their experiences outside of our gates, and how a reduction in public services fuels this. Analysis on the precarity of people's incomes in Scotland by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation suggests that 280,000 people are just £40 a week away from being in poverty. 50,000 people are £10 a week. This is on top of the 1.1 million people, including 240,000 children locked in poverty. The need for higher quality public services could not be greater. Research by Audit Scotland states that councils are overspending on delivering services and borrowing more. In its latest update on council finances, the Accounts Commission report that councils face a budget gap of nearly £1 billion by 2027. The reality we see in schools is the frontline impact of efficiency savings, or so-called efficiency savings. Our wider school communities are thinned out as a plethora of non-teaching colleagues who provide crucial services for young people are cut. As the village needed to raise our children is abandoned, there is an expectation that teachers will do their jobs. We shouldn't, and we wouldn't, and we won't. Thinning out services and placing the weight on fewer shoulders cannot be the answer. Properly funded public services are. Is there a real and meaningful solution? I'm talking to it. Fund services based on measures of raising taxes to deliver Scotland's, write off local government debt and ensure fair funding for local government, reinvest so-called efficiency savings, improve support and resources for addressing pupil behaviour in schools, crack down on tax avoidance, expand and restore welfare support. The motion goes on. Comrades, I'm so proud to support this motion on behalf of the EIS because it doesn't just say no more cuts, it demands a rebuild. It lays out the framework for how we as a movement can build the Scotland that workers, those out of work and young people deserve. Support the composite. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. I'll call the speaker from Aberdeen Trades Council. Oh, sorry, speaker from the RMT, please.
George Welch rising to support this composite. Congress, we warmly support this motion because it calls for the Scottish Government to commit to a public sector insourcing plan, something that the RMT has called for in our own industry. In the rail industry, 30 years of privatisation brought with it the utter fragmentation of our transport services. On many parts of the network, cleaners, security guards, caterers, revenue inspectors, infrastructure maintenance workers, civil engineering, track renewal, all of it was designated non-core work and then chopped up and given to the private sector. If you're an outsourced worker in cleaning, catering or security, you're more likely to be a BME worker and more likely to be a migrant worker, and you're locked into a job with your pay at the bottom of the scale, no sick pay and no chance of a decent pension in retirement. If you're a subcontracted worker on the track, the chances are you're in some kind of 0 hours contract making money for a publicly subsidised construction giant. The RMT estimates that those companies are likely to have walked off with around £28 million in profits from Scotland this year alone. Yet this is an inherently unsafe way to employ workers on the railway. It puts people desperate for shifts in positions where they will, under pressure to exaggerate their skills and cut corners, placing their own lives in danger and those of passengers and colleagues too. Congress, the UK government promises the biggest wave of insourcing in a generation. A real wave of insourcing would replace this carve-up of jobs and pursuit of the bottom line at workers' expense with an integrated public service workforce that would recognise the work that people do, value the skills and experience they gain, and support them in training, progressing to other jobs on the railway. We need public service employees to work with us to develop proper workforce plans. The Scottish Government can start that work by mandating all public service employers to start working with unions to end outsourcing and make public services truly public.
Thanks, George. Now can I call the Speaker from Aberdeen Trades Union Council to speak in support, please?
Thanks very much, President Congress. Kate Ramsden from Aberdeen Trade Union Council supporting this composite because it rightly recognises the key importance of public services in the lives of every citizen in Scotland. Unfortunately, public services, especially council services, have been easy targets for cuts, especially over the years since austerity. There's been a failure, and not for the first time, of joined-up thinking by this Scottish Government. They failed to understand that cuts, especially to hard-hit council services, directly affect their important preventative role, for example, to mitigate child poverty, reduce health inequalities, prevent youth crime, and more. So in many ways, these cuts have cost more, both to communities and to the public purse. And we've heard already that public services have also been vulnerable to outsourcing and privatisation. I feel like I've spent my entire political life fighting this since Thatcher sent us off on this trajectory. Utilities, transport, care services, PFI, to name but a few. It's been another egregious strategy that affects the working class the most, puts money in the pockets of the richest, and completely undermines our public services. It's capitalism writ large. Our amendment specifically condemns the profits that are currently being made in Scotland through the care of some of our most vulnerable children, those in local authority care. A recent study by Commonwealth's Care Reform Group found that 10.2 million is being extracted from child care services in private profit. That's £28,000 per child. And those profits can only be made because wages and conditions of the workforce are held down. These workers committed to caring for children in our care are not valued or paid for the important work they do, so that private providers can make profits. The Promise Scotland, which came out of a wide-ranging review of children's care in Scotland, made a commitment to remove profit from children's residential care. It said that Scotland must avoid the monetisation of the care of children and prevent marketisation of care, ensuring that its most vulnerable children are not profited from. But that's not what the Scottish Government intends to do. It plans only to get rid of excessive profits, whatever that means. So we are looking for the General Council to lobby the Scottish Government to go further and ensure there's no profit made from the care of our most vulnerable children. It can be done. The Commonwealth paper shows how, and Wales has passed legislation taking profit out of children's care services. So please support this composite, and in doing so give this Government a clear message that it cannot allow profit to be made on the backs of our most vulnerable children. Please support.
Thanks, Kate. Do you have any more supporting speakers or opposing speakers?
David Story, FDA Union. Thank you, President, Congress. The FDA supports Composite A. As a civil service union, we believe any successful public service reform must be rooted in clear, deliverable strategy that prioritises long-term stability over short-term savings. The Scottish Government's current trajectory, aiming for significant job reductions and cost savings by 2030, presents a major challenge for those tasked with managing our institutions. From a leadership perspective, we need more than just fiscal targets. We need a roadmap that ensures our public services remain resilient and capable of meeting the public's needs and responding to emergencies. A meaningful plan for the future should focus on strategic workforce planning, moving away from blunt headcount reductions towards professional job design that addresses the root causes of workload pressures. Operational excellence, creating a framework that allows managers the capacity to implement sustainable improvements rather than navigating a cycle of constant organisational change. Utilising the unique insights of the workforce to streamline processes and modernise delivery while maintaining the accountability and high standards that the public rightly expects. Effective reform is about high-performance governance. It requires a collaborative approach that respects the value of professional management and ensures that the expertise required to run a modern state is protected and nurtured. We call for a strategy that focuses on sustainable investment and a clear professional plan for how we can do public service better. Please support Composite A. Thank you.
Thanks, David. No more speakers. That was Composite A, Public Services, covering amended motions 2 and 35 and motions 33 and 38. Please note that the General Council is recommending support of this motion. I'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Any against? Abstentions? Composite A, Public Services, covering amended motions 2 and 35 and motions 33 and 38 is carried. I now call Composite K, Public Service Reform, covering motions 34 and 36, and I invite PCS to move the composite motion.
Good afternoon, Congress. My name is Ruth Horsfall. I'm moving Composite K on behalf of PCS. Public Service Reform, or PSR, was launched last June to great fanfare, promoted as a high-level, ambitious strategy regarding shared services, better use of data and technology, and a focus on people, place, and communities. Big words. One of its work streams even talks about co-design of change with trade unions in service of these aims. It was hard to write this moving speech, also because a lot of my thunder has been stolen now. But as in less than a year, there's already been an embarrassment of riches to draw on about how little ambition, innovation, or strategy we have seen. In practice, as our sister union in Scottish Government, FDA, has just mentioned, what PSR has amounted to since last summer is directives from ministers to cut billions in spending, including explicit and implicit cuts to headcount by 2030. During the public sector 2025 pay disputes, the government was more than happy to leave unchallenged narratives about work-shy civil servants who couldn't be asked getting into an office. In the same vein, commitments to protecting frontline services at the cost of expendable back-office staff are just further attempts to sow division between public sector workers and create tiers of the deserving and undeserving. Public sector workers are also users of these so-called critical frontline services, whether that be as NHS patients, social security clients, parents, or unpaid workers. Not only do those workers get hit twice through wages and working conditions decimated through below inflation pay settlements and efforts to erode workplace entitlements, but we have front row seats to the way budget cuts make the ability to deliver these services literally impossible. The SNP's own election manifesto states that Scotland needs protecting from Westminster's wrong choices and to bring about an end to a broken system that only favours parts of the country and the very wealthiest in our society. It's not possible to both want to establish a vision for Scottish Government as distinct from a UK government that can no longer form an economic vision beyond austerity and captured by capitalist interests, while at the same time handing down cynical electioneering budgets that seek to impose the same conditions on Scottish workers and communities. Commitments of additional funds to health, education and transport are always welcome, but without a fully staffed and funded civil service, meaningful reform can never be realised, with recruitment controls already leading to brain drain as workers choose to leave, taking years and in some cases decades of knowledge and expertise with them. Since the 2008 crash, and in some cases before, public bodies have already undergone extensive restructuring in search of so-called efficiencies without any kind of change to the ambitions set out in programs for government. There is simply no more blood to be gotten from the stone. We must oppose any reduction to the size of the public sector, regardless of how it is achieved, and remind the government of its tax powers to raise billions for the exchequer that could dramatically expand the kind of universal and accessible public service offerings the government is more than happy to crow about when election time comes around. Indeed, as a recent recipient of a baby box, I couldn't help but wonder how long such a relatively small but remarkable and visionary public service will continue to exist for if we continue down this path. Announcements of a private jet tax, progressive income tax measures, and the introduction of a mansion tax in this year's budgets were wins for workers. But so much more can be done with regards to taxation that would support and enhance critical frontline services and protect public sector workers. This is not the kind of public service reform we desperately need. This is the kind of public service reform we desperately need, not a repackaging of austerity measures as innovation. What is even more infuriating is that even when trade unions are taking action to look at how public service jobs could be redesigned to improve conditions for both workers and service users in line with the government's own ambitions, they continue to face blocks and obstructions. Efforts by PCS reps and Social Security Scotland to deliver a worker-led project with the Autonomy Institute that could radically change how public sector operational delivery functions are designed are not welcomed or encouraged, even though they clearly fit within the reform remit. Workers do not fear change, and we are willing to work with the government if genuine co-design of change to improve public services is the goal. However, those workers know better than any minister ever could that government commitments must be delivered by public sector workers, not by private sector outsourcing, third sector volunteers, unaccountable robots, or rapacious and exploitative tech multinationals selling AI products that only exist to generate profits for shareholders in the international billionaire class. Please support Composite K. I move.
Thank you, Ruth. I have Aberdeen Trades Council down as seconding.
President, Congress, Amy Snell, Aberdeen Trades Council, proud to second this composite. Congress, when you look past the language in the Scottish Government's public service reform strategy, what you actually see is pretty familiar. It's about saving money. And the way they plan to do that is by reducing the workforce, shifting services out of the public sector, and centralising how things are run. Now, we've all heard the buzzwords, the jargon, reform, streamline, efficiency. But workers know what that looks like in real life. It means fewer staff and more pressure. And it means services struggling to keep up with demand in an increasingly hostile society, putting workers at further risk of abuse and harassment. Let's just say it how it is. You can't improve public services by cutting the people who deliver them. Congress, we must also challenge the implication that some roles matter more than others, that if you protect the front line, you can simply strip everything else back. But as every single one of us in this room knows, that's not how it works. There are no extra roles, there is no spare capacity, and every job is part of making services function. Take people out of that system and the whole thing starts to fail. We must be cognizant as to the direction this proposed reform takes us in, and I'll take this opportunity to highlight the increasingly worrying connotations of reform and how this is used to divide the working classes. Calling the third sector a delivery partner might sound harmless, but often that's just outsourcing by any other name. And pushing for centralised all Scotland solutions risks pulling decisions further away from the communities services are meant to support. At the same time, we're told this is about prevention. Workers have already had more than enough. They kept services going through austerity, they stepped up during the pandemic, and they're still holding things together right now to the detriment of their own lives. So asking workers to do even more with even less, it's not realistic and it's not fair. Congress, this composite sets out a different approach, one that starts with workers, not cuts, one that focuses on fixing the real problems that we as real, normal, working people face. These services aren't a burden, they're something people rely on. So we must stand with workers and stand up for the future of our public services. Congress, support this motion.
Thank you, comrade. And I'll call for any other supporting or opposing speakers.
Congress, Jim McFarlane, Unison Scotland, speaking in support of Composite K. Congress, over 60,000 jobs have been lost across the public sector since the banking crash. The latest Scottish Government Public Service Review Strategy document looks to cut funding and jobs even further. Their own figures talk about a loss of 11,000 jobs. As Unison Scotland, we estimate it could be as high as 15,000 jobs that will be sacrificed. The language used is not new. The language used is straight out of the Tory David Cameron Big Society playbook of cutting the public sector and returning to a reliance on the voluntary and third sector to fill the gap. Congress, there can be a role, a supplementary role for the third sector, but it should not replace the services currently provided in the public sector. The reality is that the third sector are already on their knees and have had chronic underfunding for a number of years and just doesn't have the capacity to take up the slack or the gap that would be missing. Those services that our members provide day in, day out in every single community across Scotland exist because there's a clear need for them and that previous generations fought to win those services for our communities. These are clear political choices being made by the Scottish Government. The break-up and outsourcing doesn't deliver better services or outcomes for our communities. By every single indicator, public services delivered in-house perform better and provide better outcomes for service users than those provided by the so-called market. They also provide better terms and conditions for the workers in those services. Our demand to the Scottish Government is listen to the people on the ground with real experience of delivering those services. We need real investment, not more cuts and outsourcing. Local government in particular has been hard hit with savage cuts on an annual basis. I hear talk from my local councillors here in Dundee that they need to concentrate on core and essential services. Congress, every single job our members do is essential, and frankly it's an insult to suggest anything different. There is already a recruitment and retention crisis across a number of public services. It's not good enough to be claiming that care workers in the third sector being paid the Scottish living wage of £13.45 an hour is something to boast about. The skills needed to carry out that role should be valued and paid a hell of a lot more than that. We need more care workers, not less. We need more bin workers, not less. We need more schools and early years workers, not less. The message should be clear from this Congress to the Scottish Government. Deliver on those promises, deliver on improving our public services, and if you're not prepared to do that, get out of the way and we will build a campaign for those services.
Thanks, Jim. One last speaker.
President, Congress, James McIntyre, EIS, speaking in support of Composite K. We need to strip this back to what's actually being proposed here. We keep hearing the word reform, but from where we are in local government, this isn't reform, it's reduction. It's reducing budgets, it's reducing staff, and it's expecting the same or more to be delivered with less. And we've seen this before. When services are cut back, the demand doesn't disappear. It shifts, it builds, and it then lands somewhere else. Often it lands in schools, it lands in social care, it lands in already stretched frontline services. And I can say that with confidence from Eastern Bartonshire, where the EIS has already had to fight off proposals to cut teaching posts in early years. And we're seeing the wider impact of budget pressure across every service, every single day. So when we talk about streamlining or redesign, we need to be honest about what that actually means in practice. Because right now, there is no spare capacity in the system to absorb this. There is no hidden efficiency left to unlock. From a local authority perspective, services are already operating at or beyond their limits, and the workforce knows it. Staff are not resistant to change. They deal with change constantly. What they are resistant to is being asked to deliver the same outcomes with fewer people, fewer resources and less support. That's not reform, that's managed decline, and it's short-term thinking, because cutting capacity now just creates greater cost and greater pressure further down the line. If we are serious about reform, it has to be worker-led, properly resourced and focused on improving delivery, not just reducing spend. Otherwise, we are not reforming public services, we are hauling them out. Support the Composite.
Thanks, James. That was Composite K, Public Service Reform, covering motions 35 and 36. Please note the General Council is recommending support of this motion. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Composite K, Public Service Reform, covering motions 34 and 36, is carried. I now call motion 37, addressing the NHS crisis in Scotland, and I invite Unison to move the motion.
President, Congress, Angela Feeney, Unison Scotland and a proud NHS worker, moving motion 37. Congress, the NHS in Scotland delivered in the biggest public health emergency in living memory, and the NHS continue to deliver. During the pandemic, NHS workers put everything on the line, often at great personal cost. COVID did not cause the problems we see today. It exposed long-standing staffing, structural and funding weaknesses that had been building for years. Public confidence in our NHS is falling,
complaints are rising, media outlets report crisis after crisis, and every single day NHS staff are forced to navigate conditions that compromise patient care, service delivery and their own well-being. Last year, in a speech on NHS reform, the Scottish First Minister told NHS staff that they need to do more laps of the track to fix Scotland's health service. As an NHS worker, I can assure you we have no more laps in us. We are exhausted. Politicians from all parties need to start listening to staff and stop playing political football. Results of a recent Unison survey of NHS members paints a grim picture. A third of NHS staff report having taken time off for mental health. 83% have experienced stress at work over the past 12 months. Congress, repeated relaunches and recovery plans have promised a return to pre-pandemic performance, yet the reality facing staff and patients tells a very different story. At the heart of this crisis is underfunding, not just of the NHS, but of public services across the board. The NHS has become the service of the last resort. Cuts to services in housing, education, policing and public health do not make problems disappear. They simply re-emerge downstream in GP surgeries, A&E departments and hospital wards. This is why we must recognise the critical interrelationship between health, social care, social work and primary care. The so-called winter crisis is no longer seasonal, it is a daily occurrence. Almost 2,000 patients in Scotland are having their discharge from hospital delayed. Bed blocking has a knock-on effect of longer waits in A&E, indignity of corridor care, or sitting in an ambulance in the hospital car park for hours. It is bad for efficiency, bad for staff morale, but most importantly, bad for the patient's health. Safe staffing legislation was supposed to protect patients and staff. A recent Unison survey showed only 15% of staff believe their employer is doing enough on this issue. This needs to be addressed and needs to be addressed urgently. The NHS has an ageing workforce that is being asked to shoulder ever-growing pressures. Pay reform remains unfinished, pension inequality persists. Rising retirement age and the physical demands of the job are driving staff out. We need meaningful reform. Colleagues, we must also talk about the ambulance service. In 2025 alone, more than 126,000 ambulances waited for over an hour outside Scottish hospitals and over 9,000 waited 4 hours or more. This is unsafe and it is unacceptable. Ambulance staff face relentless pressure, missed breaks and uncertainty over shift ending. It is no surprise that sickness absence is rising. Paramedics deserve parity with other blue light services, guaranteed rest breaks, a maximum 1 hour wait target and real early retirement options. Finally, we must recognise Scotland's rural and remote communities. Service redesign too often means service withdrawal, forcing people to travel further for care and making recruitment and retention even harder. Reform must put patients and communities at the centre. Congress, Unison supports reform, but only reform rooted in workforce planning, fair work, realistic resourcing and respect for staff. The NHS crisis will not be solved by headlines or restructuring. It will be solved by listening to staff, patients and investment in public services. NHS trade unions must be at the heart of these discussions. This is why we call on the STUC General Council to lobby the Scottish Government to deliver real lasting solutions, because the future of our NHS and the dignity of those who work within it depends on it. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Now call for a seconder for the motion, please.
President Congress, Jackie Lambert, Royal College of Midwives, seconding the motion 37. The Royal College of Midwives stands beside our sister union in calling for real lasting solutions to the ongoing crisis and essentially the NHS trade unions must be at the table to find solutions, not to be informed of them once the ink is dry. We've long been told we have an enviable model of partnership working in Scotland, but that is at risk in the rush to run roughshod over it in the name of said political manoeuvring. We saw a real-life example of this recently when clearly there was a move to change the model of neonatal care for the smallest and sickest babies in Scotland. Now, I'm not saying the objective was wrong, but decisions were made while every effort was made to keep the unions away from the table. That decision meant that essential steps were missed to make sure that the right workforce were in the right place. In a country that sometimes it feels that it's an inconvenient shape, what with all that huge landmass that exists outside the Central Belt. But decisions such as this must be decided with the workforce, so the right decisions are made for Scotland's communities. If services are needed, they need to be there, not at the expense of those outside the Central Belt. If we're to find genuine solutions, those we care for and those that provide care must be at the heart of those solutions. Who knows the reality more than those on the ground, and that's why it's essential that we listen to every single worker and in our workforces. Safe staffing is not an outcome, it is an outcome, not a process. The healthcare staffing legislation needs to be not just more hoops to jump through that puts an extra burden on an overstretched workforce, but a tangible difference that's felt on the ground. For example, ratios of midwife to women and baby that have made a phenomenal difference in Australia. It's simple and effective and everybody understands it. New technology needs to free up the workforce to care, not to create another burden due to it being built on already fragmented and fragile infrastructure when nothing talks to anything else. No lasting solution will be found if our NHS teams are not valued and that they continue to grow, develop and learn throughout their career. Conference, we support this motion.
Thank you, Jackie. Any further supporting colleagues?
Hi, I'm Claire Craig from the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy, supporting this motion and thanking Unison for bringing it today. I wanted to highlight a couple of key points in the motion, and those are the need to value all of our NHS staff, investing more in education for all, and to prioritise safe staffing levels and resource allocation, again, for everyone. Because for too long there's been a hierarchy of support from the government to our healthcare staff, with HP and support staff sometimes left feeling unimportant and like second-class citizens. So many government papers say we will start with nurses and then move on to other professions, only for the work to stop before the other professions' work is actioned. There are 14 allied health professions. Physiotherapy is just one of them, and you often hear from several of us at this conference. When it comes to safe staffing, the Healthcare Staffing Act has ensured HPs can identify their staffing as unsafe, but not actually link that into any action, as my colleague identified. When short-staffed, some areas of nursing can call on bank workers to fill gaps. HPs cannot access routine backfill, despite now knowing that they need it. And when it comes to training, I once had a list of health organisations sent to me for staff to apply for funding from, but only 2 were open to HPs to apply for. So in supporting this motion to address the NHS crisis in Scotland, please ensure we're working to address the NHS crisis for all NHS workers. We're not just doctors and nurses. Remember HPs and include us in all your plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Let's see any other speakers. That was motion 37, addressing the NHS crisis in Scotland. Please note the General Council is recommending support. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Motion 37, addressing the NHS crisis in Scotland, is carried. I now call motion 40, funding the fire service, 10 years of public service sector reform, and I invite the FBU to move this motion. In your own time, Gus.
President, Congress, Gus Brill, Firebrigades Union, move in Resolution 40, funding the fire service. Congress, as we're all aware, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service was created in 2013 and is regularly held up as an exemplar of public sector reform, with the original 350 million of savings, the projected savings dwarfed by the actual figure, pushing £900 million now. It's no coincidence that the capital backlog facing the fire service in Scotland is also around £900 million by their own figures. Despite the promise that savings would be reinvested in the service, as Ruby mentioned earlier, we've lost 1,250 firefighter posts and they have an estate that is in a large part unfit for purpose, with fire stations still lacking the most basic facilities and some stations still being held up by internal scaffolding that's been there for 5 years. We've been here making the case for funding the fire service every year, and we thank Congress for the backing and the support given to our campaign to expand the role of a firefighter in Scotland, which up until now had amounted to nothing. But this week we saw manifesto commitments from all the parties, most notably from the party that's been in government for the last 19 years, to fund this groundbreaking piece of real public sector reform. While this commitment's welcome and long overdue, we're still facing a service delivery review that's proposing station closures and reductions in fire cover in locations all across the country. These things can't happen at the same time. We can't take on a wider role while losing firefighter jobs and seeing stations close and fire cover reduced. Congress has a brutal and depressing irony that at the time the First Minister visited the scene of the Union Street fire, the FPU were in a meeting with civil servants being briefed on the integrated public sector workforce and pay policy, and the associated 2026-27 budget documents have forecast flat cash budgets for the next 2 years, which for the SFRS would result in a loss of over 500 further firefighter posts. Congress, what motivation can there possibly be for any other organisation in the public sector to follow the path of reform that sees year-on-year cuts impacting headcount and reducing safety? So Congress, again, the FPU is calling on the trade union movement to keep supporting us, keep pushing for real reform for the benefit of workers and for our communities. It's taken us since 2022 to get this commitment to fund role expansion, and this needs to be the start of a positive vision for Scotland's public services. Manifesto commitments a few weeks out from election aren't enough. This needs followed up, needs to be worker-led, needs long-term funding to address a myriad of challenges in a crumbling estate, and needs to earn us a label of being that exemplar of public sector reform, not just a cover for even deeper cuts. Congress, a move. Please back the motion.
Thanks, Gus. Looking for a seconder for the motion. Formally, thank you. Colleagues, that was motion 40, funding the fire service, 10 years of public sector reform. General Counsel is recommending support for this motion. So I'm going to move to the vote. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Motion 40, funding the fire service, 10 years of public sector reform, is carried. Delegates, I would now like to warmly welcome Tara Lillis, Chair of the STUC Women's Committee, to address Congress. This year, Tara celebrated 20 years with the NASUWT, where she is the policy official. She's also part of the Steering Committee for Women Against the Far Right in Scotland. Tara.
Good afternoon, Congress, President. I am so delighted to be here today in Dundee, surrounded by comrades old and new, and all here with the same goal, that to demand better. So I'm Tara Lillis. I stand here today as Chair of the STUC Women's Committee and Policy Official at NASUWT, the Teachers' Union. Wee bit about me, I was born in January 1981, which is just before the famous 1981 Lee Jeans factory sit-in. So as most of you will know, that sit-in was a successful 7-month industrial occupation by primarily women workers in Greenock, who occupied their workplace to fight against closure plans by Vanity Fair Corporation. Led by fierce women with an innate sense of their own power, 240 workers barricaded the doors, preventing the removal of machinery in order to secure their jobs. The area these women lived and worked in had an average female unemployment rate of 50% higher than the national average, and these women fought tooth and nail to keep their factory going. Workers were there 24/7 for the duration of the sit-in, operating shifts to organise cooking and security. Sadly, the parallels to Scotland today are stark. We still see companies who receive public money, but they don't stand by their workers. Vanity Fair Corporation had received huge amounts of government support for the factory in Inverclyde. They received free rent and rates for the first 3 years and paid half rent and rates for the following 3. And the government paid 40% towards machinery, and they received a premium of £2 per worker per week. And yet, the company decided it was unprofitable to remain there and keep those women employed. Suspicion at the time was that they were simply profiteering, looking to relocate somewhere else so that they could continue to source more government subsidies. And while that sit-in was successful in many ways, the factory closed for good 2 years after the occupation. Another similarity to today is the way that these workers, women workers, were seen as disposable. Yet the story of these women and their sit-in is still one to inspire future activists. And it certainly inspired me. It demonstrates the strength, perseverance, and solidarity of collective action among women. And truly, finding inspiration and hope in collective solidarity and strength has never been more needed, Congress. Because yet again, we meet at a time of crisis. Indeed, several crises, overlapping and amplifying each other. As a movement, we're battling with the start of yet another cost of living crisis, deepened by the war in the Middle East. We have far-right agitators capitalising on people's isolation and their fear, while abroad there are wars raging, precarious and dubious ceasefires declared, and all the while the climate crisis ravages communities and our planet. And it would be remiss of me not to send our solidarity to the communities directly impacted by war, especially women and girls. As we have seen in Iran, the situation in Palestine, and those impacted in the south of Lebanon, women and children often face the most dire consequences of conflict. And it shouldn't need to be said, Congress, that the places of education should never be targets for bombing. I've seen the work firsthand that educators do in conflict zones and in places of refuge. Back in 2001, I spent 5 weeks in the Rushdie refugee camp in the south of Lebanon, teaching English. Education is so fundamental. It has never been neutral. Education has the power to liberate or to subjugate. So spaces of education must be protected. And as the election approaches, we all know our trade union movement needs to be at the forefront, demanding better from our prospective politicians. Our members deserve better from our Scottish Government, and our elected officials must be consistently held to account. This morning, we've seen critical motions debated covering issues that strike close to my heart as policy official of any SUWT. We know from member experiences that our classrooms are in crisis. Teachers and support staff must feel heard, supported, and feel confident that action will be taken by government and employers. Their working conditions are the learning conditions of the future of Scotland. And this afternoon, the motions on public services really resonated with me in my role as chair of the Women's Committee. While public service funding affects all of us, it has been shown time and time again that women and our public services are especially and inextricably linked. Our public services are staffed predominantly by women, and women are more likely to use our public services. A more equal and caring economy is possible, and councils should promote equality through gender budgeting to build a fairer and more equal Scotland, because Scotland needs an economy that works for women, for all of us to prosper. Amidst another year of industrial, political, social and global upheaval, and with no shortage of strikes, struggles and solidarity causes, the STUC Women's Committee work plan has been extensive. We released our own manifesto, Women Demand Better, calling for investment in our public services, improvements to workplaces for women, real steps towards eradicating poverty and to ensure equality for all. We also recently partnered on an elections hustings within gender, joining activists in Edinburgh for an International Women's Day, and supported workshops for Let's Change the Act, Scotland's campaign to decriminalise abortion. And of course, we held our annual STUC Women's Weekend School, bringing women trade unionists together from a range of sectors and experiences, where we could learn and grow in confidence together, take part in a mock conference, building comradeship and sisterhood collectively, while also having a lot of fun. And it's great to see women trade unionists develop their skills in such a supportive environment. But mostly, Congress, I'm very proud to say that the Women's Committee has been very active in the fight against the far right. Indeed, this is our main priority as a committee. As a key part of Women Against the Far Right Scotland, we have linked up with other women across Scotland who are disgusted by the far right attempts to demonise people seeking asylum. The far right have claimed that they're doing so in defence of women and children, We know they do not care one bit about the liberation of women and girls. It is simply a vehicle to spread hate, and we will not allow the spreading of misinformation and the inciting of violence to go unchecked, because racism or bigotry of any kind must not be tolerated. Women, many of them members of Women Against the Far Right Scotland, have faced significant personal impacts as a result of their activism in Falkirk, in Perth, in Aberdeen and elsewhere. Women have been followed home, abused online and threatened in person. This should not be happening to women defending their communities from racists and fascists. And the solidarity felt by women collectivising across unions and communities is the antidote to such harassment and abuse. We remain undeterred. Women will continue to show up because we know that these are the desperate grasps of a far-right movement that will not win. We show up because our communities need us to. The far-right seek to attack us because they lack our strength and collective solidarity. But our message of hope over fear resonates with people. And fundamentally, Congress, there are very many more of us than them. While it's important to be visible at marches, demos, counter-demonstrations, it is just as important for us as trade unionists to challenge bigotry and discrimination wherever we see it in our workplaces. We have a unique and powerful role to play. Many of us here will have witnessed the increase in prejudice-based violence and behaviours in workplaces, whether it's against migrants, trans people, or anyone whose society's narrow boundaries can class as different. Women often face the brunt of this abuse and violence, both in person and online. The shocking uptick in protests taking place outside schools, for example in Dalmarnock, is a development which affects a largely female workforce. Women occupy many front-facing public roles, from nurses to social workers to carers, and women from minority ethnic backgrounds, gender non-conforming women and trans women are disproportionately the target of choice. Congress, we cannot be passive in the face of increased violence and abuse against women at work, in our communities and online. We have a role as trade unionists to not only lead the fight against the far right, but to also accept that the status quo will be insufficient to tackle the tsunami of violence and abuse against women at work. We also need to look inwards as well as out, and that means tackling and preventing sexual harassment not only at work, but also within our own movement, within our unions. The pace at which misogyny is deepening is frightening. With the rise of incel and manosphere culture, young boys are being groomed online and in communities to see women as the enemy, as something to be controlled or dominated. Sexual harassment has been supercharged, with AI creating deepfakes of women and girls, which further impacts their sense of safety at their home, at their work, in their communities, and online. Men within the trade union movement have a vital role to play here. Young men and boys need positive role models. They need to see men stepping up for women. They need to see men challenging misogyny, calling it out, saying, "No, that's not on." As women, we can't fix this alone. We need positive and progressive masculinity narratives to challenge rigid gender norms and the far right's twisted story. Young people are facing huge pressures, and algorithms are stacked to ensure what they see online is men behaving like Andrew Tate, being lauded as strong or powerful. There's nothing strong or powerful about abusing women, about being misogynistic. Young men need to see that being strong and powerful is about standing up for each other, showing compassion, uplifting people, caring about each other. So to the men in the room, think about the young men and boys in your life. In the face of such an onslaught of misogynistic narratives online, what are you doing for them? What could you be doing to support them? I ask because the dangers of inaction are huge. By letting young boys and men be sucked into the manosphere, we are playing into the hands of the very well-funded far right. It harms us all. It benefits no one except billionaires. To the women and non-binary siblings in the room, I want us to use every available lever for change. I want us all to be voting in the next election. I want us all to be encouraging our friends and our family to register to vote, to use that vote. We need to ensure that women are at the table, not on the menu. We need to ensure that women's health, pay, flexible working rights are priorities not just for the next government, but for trade union bargaining agendas as we go forward. And we need to channel the strength of the women at the Lee Jeans factory back in 1981 and be the inspiration for future generations, just as they inspired me. To everyone in this room, we need to stand together. Women need our trade union brothers to stand beside us in the fight, just as we in the Women's Committee need to ensure that we're reflective to the calls coming from other equality committees. We always need to be listening and learning from our Black, LGBT+, young and disabled comrades. There is no place for misogyny, misogynoir, sexual harassment, transphobia, discrimination or bigotry of any kind in our workplaces or in our movement. There is no true solidarity without intersectionality, and only together can we win. On behalf of the STUC Women's Committee, thank you for your continuing support.
Thank you, Tara. That was fantastic. Colleagues, we move on to motion 80, Cuts Kill, standing in the name of the FBU, and I ask the FBU to move, please.
President, Congress, Adam Taylor, National Officer for Fire Brigades Union, moving motion 80, Cuts Kill. If you're a teacher, cuts have consequences. If you're a prison officer, cuts have consequences. If you're a railway worker, cuts have consequences. If you're a nurse, cuts have consequences. If you're a firefighter, cuts have consequences. Cuts kill. Because in our service, every fire engine cut, every closed station, every firefighter post lost, every control operator taken off the shift means longer response times, greater pressure and greater danger. And in Scotland, we know exactly what that means. For more than a decade, firefighters across Scotland have seen cuts dressed up as reallocation of resources. We have seen firefighter numbers reduced. We have seen stations threatened. We have seen emergency fire cover stretched thinner and thinner. The warning from our union has been clear. Continued reductions in funding to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service will put public safety at risk. With over 1,000 firefighter posts lost since national reform began and response times rising as a result. And when bosses and politicians talk about efficiency, what firefighters hear is this: smaller crews, fewer pumps, fewer firefighters, and more risk, because you cannot cut your way to public safety. And this is not just an issue in Scotland. Across the UK, firefighters are standing up and saying they've had enough. With over 12,000 fewer firefighters, dozens of stations shut, with not enough firefighters on fire engines and in control rooms, enough is simply enough. We've seen proposed cuts to Mid and West Wales Fire Service defeated. Under the Cuts Kill campaign in Avon, firefighters have fought back against cuts that would remove frontline posts from a service already under severe strain. In Leicestershire, the same there, one of the lowest funded UK fire and rescue services that has been cut time and time again. But when faced with the latest proposals, members fought back and won. In Oxfordshire, Firefighters faced proposals that would close stations, remove fire engines and cut jobs. And firefighters there answered with unity in a consultative industrial action ballot which saw a 71% turnout and a 94% yes vote. Not just meeting the anti-trade union laws imposed on working people, but smashing them. These proposals have been scrapped and we won. And let's not forget that these proposed cuts came almost a year after two of our comrades lost their lives at a fire in Oxfordshire, which is shameful. The fight is ongoing in Dorset and Wiltshire, and all of this against the backdrop of an increasing climate-related incidents that have stretched even the most funded of fire and rescue services. Just last year, 17 different fire services from across the UK responded to a wildfire in Dorset. Firefighters understand something very simple. When cuts come for one service, they never stop there. They come for another and another and another. That is why this motion matters beyond our union and our members. Because this is not just about firefighters. It is about whether working people are expected to pay the price for political choices we did not make. It is about whether public services exist to protect people or whether they are slowly dismantled piece by piece. And every union in this hall today understands that. Because whether it is in schools, hospitals, transport, prisons or emergency services, working people are always told there is no money. But there always seems to be money for contracts, money for consultants, money for profit. And that is why this Congress must send a clear message today. Public safety is not a luxury. Fire cover is not optional. And workers' lives are not expendable. Congress, we are in a fight. It is a class fight. It is a fight of workers versus greed. And they have started attacks, and we must end them. Because our fight is far too important. They are fighting to line their pockets with their eternal profits. We are fighting to survive. We are fighting for our very lives. We must stand up against this brutality. We must fight back. We must stop the cuts that kill. Congress, support the motion.
Thank you, Speaker. We now call for a seconder to the motion. Can we move it formally? Thank you. I now call for any other supporting and opposing speakers. Yep. We'll now move to the vote. That was motion 80, Cuts Kill Campaign. Please note that the General Council recommends support. I'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That motion, 80, Cuts Kill Campaign, is carried.
Thanks, Jenny. I now call motion 46, Balmossy Community Fire and Ambulance Station, standing in the name of Dundee Trades Union Council.
Good afternoon, Congress. My name is Graham Jenkins and from the United Union and Dundee Trade City Council. Before I start to move this motion, I'd just like to thank Stuart Fairweather for his kind words for George Ramsey this morning. I've known George for over 25 years as a council work colleague, a regional officer for Unite, a Dundee Trade Union Council comrade and a good friend. He'll be a massive miss to the movement and everyone who helped and myself. Congress, since 2013, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Services resources budget has reduced in real terms by 58 million per annum, with 1,239 firefighters posts lost in that time. We oppose the apparent trend towards the cuts in stations, appliances, firefighters and the increase in response times across Scotland. We oppose the review to close or downgrade the Balmossy Community Fire and Ambulance Station. You could read this motion in the agenda in the paperwork, but I'm going to read you a recent account of a fire by a resident serviced by the Balmossy Fire and Rescue Ambulance Station. I am writing to express my strongest possible objection to any proposal to close Balmossy Fire and Ambulance Station. This is not theoretical concern for my family, it is based on recent, very real incident at our home in Carnoustie. Although we were not inside at the property at the time or in immediate danger, we would have been in the house. The situation would have placed the lives of our 2 adults and 3 children at significant risk. On that occasion, the Carnoustie on-call station was unavailable to respond. It was the crews from Balmossy who arrived swiftly and took immediate and decisive action. Their competence prevented what could have escalated into a catastrophic situation. I want to be clear that had Balmossy crews not arrived as quickly as they did, the fire would have almost certainly spread into our attic. At that point, we could have easily lost our home, and worse still, the neighbouring property, which has solar-powered roof and lithium battery storage in the attic, could have been placed at extreme risk, leading to an extremely dangerous and uncontrollable situation. Quite simply, their fast response did not just save the property, it prevented a far more serious incident involving multiple homes, potential loss of life, and I would also like to extend my sincere thanks to the crews from Dundee and Arbroath who attended shortly afterwards. However, we recognise that their attendance came later in a rapidly developing fire. Minutes matter, and Balmossy made the critical difference. This leads me to the central point. This must never be a budgetary decision that places a cost on human life. Closing Balmossy Fire Station or downgrading it would undeniably increase response times in Carnoustie, Moneythief, Broughty Ferry and the surrounding areas. This is simply longer response times mean fires grow larger, risks increase and lives are placed in greater danger. It is there that people trapped inside their home, those additional minutes could have been the difference between survival and tragedy. Fire and rescue services exist to protect life first and foremost. Any proposal knowingly reducing emergency response capability in populated areas is deeply concerning and, in my view, unacceptable. I urge you in the strongest possible terms to reconsider any plans to close Balmossy Fire Station or downgrade it. The consequences are not abstract, they are real, immediate and potentially devastating to families like mine and countless others in the community. No financial saving can ever justify increased risk to human life. Balmossy was opened in 1981. Closing or downgrading the station would undeniably increase response times for fire and ambulance services to Carnoustie, Moneythief, Broughty Ferry and the surrounding areas. It will also reduce resilience and it will increase risks to property and, more importantly, life. Those areas have continued to grow with new housing developments and increased population. Allowing the closure or downgrading would have a massive impact on this community. I move this motion. Please support.
Thank you, Graham. Call for a seconder to the motion, please.
President, Congress, Lillis Clark, Fire Brigade Union. We were asked to composite this motion, but the FPU decided to be remiss to not give the recognition to Dundee Trade Council's motion and their fantastic efforts in this campaign. The FPU fully support and thank Dundee's Trades Council for moving this important motion. The Trades Council have already successfully campaigned against similar cuts proposals over many, many years and are once again at the front of this battle to ensure our communities have the fire and rescue cover they need and deserve. We have seen huge rejection of the proposals to close Balmossy from councillors, MSPs, MPs, community groups, trade unions and of course our FPU members across the political spectrum. The campaigning that our members have led has been extraordinary. We've secured multiple debates in Scottish Parliament, held our demos, held massively attended public meetings in our communities and have been standing up at every opportunity to ensure that these proposals are not implemented without a fight at every opportunity. These campaigns have been supported and coordinated by ourselves as FPU officials, but we've been playing second fiddle really. It's been our members in the communities that they serve that have led and sustained this campaign. From Balmossy to Lochgelly, Marienville, Hoyt, Greenock, all across the country, we've had our members step up. Members that are educated, empowered and willing to fight for the safety and security of their communities and their firefighter comrades. Our members across the country have had the support of their trades councils, shown their great worth and speciality in fighting directly for their communities. Every corner that the fire service and the ministers who have refused to take control and accountabilities for these proposals, have looked around, our members have been there with discipline and passion to ensure our voices are heard loud and clear. The FBU does not accept dangerous cuts. Our communities do not accept their services being stripped, and this Congress does not condone any cuts agenda for our service or any other. Conference, please support the motion.
Thanks, Lewis. I don't see any other speakers, so that was motion 46, Balmossy Community Fire and Ambulance Station. The General Council is recommending support for this motion. I'm going to call a vote. All those in favour? Any against? Abstentions? Motion 46, Balmossy Community Fire and Ambulance Station is carried. I now call Composite M, Ethical Procurement, covering motions 48 and 49, and I invite Edinburgh Trade Union Council to move the composite motion.
Thank you, President. Rory Dempster, you love to hear it. First time delegate, first time speaker. From Edinburgh Trades Council. Thank you again, President, Congress, comrades. I rise to move Composite M. We are told repeatedly that procurement is a matter of spreadsheets and of value for money. But as trade unionists, we know something different, that procurement, as with everything else, is a class issue. Every public contract awarded to an unethical corporation is a transfer of wealth from the working class to a predatory ruling class that views human rights as an obstacle for profit. For too long, the ethical considerations of our government have stopped solely at the shop floor, but our struggle for fairness cannot be parochial. If a product made through the blood of workers abroad or the displacement of communities by paramilitary forces, that product is tainted. Fairness must extend through the shop floor to the entire supply chain. And let's be clear, we're not asking for the world, we're not asking for the earth with this motion, we're simply asking for the Scottish Government to, we're simply demanding that they stop ignoring the one that's already there. The UN guiding principles are the bare minimum of international decency. By failing to bake these into law, the government isn't being fiscally responsible, they're just being morally negligent. And the motion demands a legal obligation to exclude those who profit from machinery of death. We're talking about companies that bankroll war crimes, breach the Geneva Convention, and facilitate genocide. There can be no neutrality when public money flows into the pockets of those arming the oppressors of the poor. As Ros very clearly laid out in our General Secretary introduction, as a country we should be using public money to create good jobs and domestic supply chains, not providing blank cheques for business with no conditions attached. And we must further see through the corporate veil. We know how capital hides. They use a haze of parent companies and subsidiaries to mask their crimes. This composite shuts the door on that shell game. Additionally, as a GMB member, I know clearly the important skill and dedication of our and other members in the manufacturing and defence industries. They're the very skills that are needed to build a sustainable and a peaceful future. And we should stand with the principles of the Alternative Defence Review and be clear that by shutting the door on war profiteers, we force the state to invest in socially useful production. Furthermore, we must address the theft of our public resources. Anti-competitive practices, bid rigging and cartels are not market fluctuations, they are direct raids on the public purse, on our money. This is money stolen from our schools, our hospitals and our wages to line the pocket of a corporate elite who think they are above the law. As a movement, we've always known that ethical procurement is a tool of international solidarity, and when we flex our economic muscle, we stand with workers in every corner of the globe. And finally, let's talk about our own house. When our public bodies contract out to these bad actors, they damage the integrity of unionised workplaces. They bring a culture of greed and lawlessness into the heart of our public services. We cannot defend the dignity of our labour at home whilst our employer finances the destruction of dignity abroad. It's time to stop asking nicely, and it is time to move from encouraging ethical behaviour to legally requiring it. Let's ensure that not a single penny of Scottish public money is used to bankroll human rights abuses or corporate corruption. Let's ensure that not one penny of our labour is used to fund the enemies of our class. Please support the composite.
Thanks, Rory. I call Midlothian Trades Union Council to second the composite motion, please. Thank you. Any other supporting speakers? No. Okay, that was composite M, ethical procurement, covering motions 48 and 49. The General Council is recommending support. I'm going to call the vote. All those in favour? Any against? Abstentions? Composite M, ethical procurement, covering motions 48 and 49 is carried. Now call motion 41, holding pharmacy business owners to account, protecting patients and the NHS, standing in the name of the PDA. Paul?
Thank you, Richard. Quicker than the FBU today, so well done me. Congress President Paul Flynn, Pharmacists Defence Association. I'm going to start with a question. So I'm assuming that most of you use community pharmacies. Have you ever attempted to access one and be met by a closed door? Show of hands. One or two. Okay, so not quite the rousing response I was hoping for, but never mind. If you've been met by a sign like this, maybe it's said no pharmacist available. Been a little door, a little printed sign saying please come back later. It's an issue that's becoming more prevalent. People who are trying to access care or medicines are being hampered by some employers who are more concerned with their profits than providing the care that they're contracted to provide. And when ownership fails, it's patients, staff and communities who pay the price. Can I remind Congress of what happened with Lloyd's Pharmacy, or for the Limmy fans in the room, Lloyd's Pharmacy. They were acquired by a private equity firm, Aurelius, in 2022, and this business had no interest in providing healthcare. It planned to make quick profits from parcelling up and selling off the business in smaller bite-sized chunks. When the people who worked there decided they would go somewhere else, they weren't replaced. The senior management at Lloyd's Pharmacy lost interest in ensuring that their business provided a decent service to patients. Over the course of 2023, more than 1,200 pharmacies were sold off in a disordered fashion, 194 of these in Scotland. The staff were unsure of their futures, not knowing who would pay them, whether they would keep their jobs, etc. By January 2024, all the sales had concluded, and the company then entered liquidation. They left £300 million worth of debt, with only £8.2 million in the coffers to pay. It was a scandal. This fire sale didn't happen without collateral damage. It caused chaos in hundreds of communities here in Scotland, and I worked in some of these branches, one of them being Rossi in Victoria Street. It was a vibrant seaside community where sadly the pharmacy fell into disarray. There were a few demoralised staff working themselves into illness in a disordered environment, desperately trying to keep providing their essential service. Some days they wouldn't have a pharmacist, as no one really wanted the risk of working there. They knew that they were failing their patients day in, day out, but there was nothing they could do about it. The patients, in turn, were understandably rather frustrated with extended waiting times, having to make multiple trips to get one prescription, and generally receiving a poorer service than they had previously. This led to the patients venting anger at the dejected staff, and while the staff struggled, Aurelius, the private equity parent company, made out like bandits, shielded by insolvency law and a structure that left the NHS, among others, out of pocket, while workers and the public were unforgivably let down and left to pick up the pieces. This Lloyd's fiasco is not an isolated case. Following Lloyd's ignoble end, Jute's Pharmacy just last year said, "Hold my beer." They were a buyer of some of the Lloyd's Pharmacy branches I mentioned earlier. They also spiralled towards insolvency, while owing 120 locum pharmacists over £1.25 million in unpaid fees, alongside unpaid staff, suppliers, utilities, and familiar operational failures. The pharmacy minister himself, Stephen Kinnock, said that Jute services were falling well below the mark. But even with all this, unpaid workers, broken NHS contracts, and communities left without functioning pharmacies, the employers responsible faced no meaningful consequences. Instead, what happened? Branches were sold off and administrators stepped in. And once again, the people left to pick up the pieces were the staff and the patients who relied on those pharmacies as their most accessible point of NHS care. The locum pharmacists, owed 1.25 million, got nothing. We have members who've been threatened by Scottish employers with reports to their regulator if they did not close the pharmacy they were working in and go to another to enable it to open, when the employer could easily just contract another locum and open both branches. They just don't want to pay. So, I'm going to move a bit quicker and cut a bit out. I had time, this obviously didn't do it very well. The GPHC, who's the pharmacy's regulator, is more focused on pharmacists than on pharmacies. We are calling for more focused and more effective regulation and focus on the actual business owners. They should be held to healthcare standards, not just commercial ones. So pharmacists can lose their registration over an honest dispensing error, but a corporate owner can walk away from £300 million in debt, unpaid workers and shattered communities without so much as a telling off. So STUC, please support our calls for more adequate regulation, and let's keep the pharmacy's doors open. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Do I have a seconder for the motion, please? Formally? Thank you. Any supporting or opposing speakers? No. That was motion 41, holding pharmacy business owners to account, protecting patients and the NHS. General Counsel is recommending support for this motion. I'm going to call the vote. All those in favour? Any against? Abstentions? Motion 41, holding pharmacy business owners to account, protecting patients and the NHS is carried. Now call motion 43, ending Scotland's postcode lottery in metabolic bone care, standing in the name of the Society of Radiographers.
Chair, Congress, Holly Buchanan, Society of Radiographers, moving this motion on ending Scotland's postcode lottery and access to metabolic bone specialist care. Osteoporosis is one of the most serious and yet least visible women's health issues in Scotland. Half of women over 50 will experience a fragility fracture in their lifetime. In Scotland alone, over 200,000 women are estimated to have hip osteoporosis, and last year more than 8,400 people suffered a hip fracture. These numbers are rising year on year. But hip fractures are only part of the story. Vertebral fractures are estimated to occur at least 3 times as often, yet accurate data on them is not consistently collected. Many women suffer not one fracture, but successive spinal fractures. The result is chronic, often excruciating pain, loss of mobility, loss of independence, and for many, forced withdrawal from work and community life. What makes this situation so unacceptable is that we now have treatments that can prevent further fractures and significantly improve quality of life. Newer anabolic therapies, such as romosozumab and abaloparatide, I've been practicing that, can only be initiated and monitored by a metabolic bone specialist. And here lies the injustice. Many health boards in Scotland do not provide access to a metabolic specialist at all. Others have waiting lists stretching beyond a year. Cross-board referral pathways are inconsistent or unavailable. As a result, access to life-changing treatment depends entirely on postcode. Conference. This is not a niche clinical issue. It is a women's health issue, an equality issue and a workforce issue. It is an issue that impacts us all because preventable fractures are turning working women into care-dependent patients. This motion calls for national leadership, proper workforce planning, transparent data and equitable access to specialist care based on need, not geography. I urge conference to support this motion and help end Scotland's postcode lottery in bone health care. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Do you have a seconder for this motion? Oh, we have a seconder.
Hello Congress, my name is Nadia from Unison, and speaking to you as a first-time delegate. Thank you. I don't actually have a speech written prepared for this, but just listening to the comments made at the moment about women's health and bone health, I have a metabolic bone disease. I've had it since I was a young child, and the access to resources, technology, support, medical advice is very limited for someone with a rare bone disease. Unfortunately, there's been cuts made to metabolic bone disease infrastructure, and a lot of that has been downplayed by the government and, you know, the pandemic. But this isn't really a pandemic issue. It's cuts again on all sorts of services, things that seem to be niche. Osteoporosis affects a lot of people that you will be have in your family. But at some point, metabolic bone diseases are actually being ignored in the actual limelight. And a lot of that is to do with it being an age thing. So osteoporosis doesn't just affect old people, it can affect young people too. It can affect men as well as women. And yes, it is an equality issue because many of our NHS staff actually have osteoporosis and continue to work in very difficult environments. So I move to support this and ask for your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nadia. Not seeing any more speakers, so that was motion 43, ending Scotland's postcode lottery in metabolic bone care. General Council is recommending support, so call the vote. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Motion 43, ending Scotland's postcode lottery in metabolic bone care, is carried. Now call motion 42, urgent action on NHS digital integration for pharmacists and other health professionals, standing in the name of the PDA Union.
President, Congress Morris Hickey, the Pharmacists Defence Association, and another cry for help from the NHS. Our motion is asking for urgent action on digital integration across NHS Scotland, particularly where it affects pharmacists. We're being asked to deliver modern healthcare using systems that belong in the last century. Safe and effective treatments rely on one basic principle. We can only make good clinical decisions when we have good clinical information. We don't have access to records. I've said this at previous congresses. We don't know what's going on if the patient's in hospital. We don't know they're dead sometimes when we try delivering their medicines to them because we can't communicate with people. It isn't a small inconvenience. It's a serious patient safety issue. When vital information is missing, we have to make decisions blindfolded, in effect, and none of that is acceptable. We rely on the patients for information. We don't know what goes on with their specialists, with their GPs. It's not a new problem. It's been going on for over 20 years. We've been promised that we would have an integrated care system, that everybody would have read-write access to notes and records. I was in meetings in 2005 and they were saying it will happen by 2010. At the moment, they're out for tenders for 2032. I don't think it will happen in the next decade. As I say, we have limited information that we get through a thing called the pharmacy care record, but it doesn't allow us to contribute. We can read it, but we can't write to it. We can't really do anything with it. We have to communicate with people. We have to write letters or we have to write emails. More often than not, the information gets lost before it gets anywhere. And in 2026, I'd say that's that's unacceptable. This stands in contrast with England. Far be it from me to bum up the English, but they have a system called, NHS England has a system called the Spine. And it's a system that, while not perfect, enables effective sharing of essential patient information between all healthcare providers. And Wales recognised this. They were trying to do the same as our government, build their own system. And then a year ago, they opted to join the English system, to use their software and adapt it to their needs. And it's gone very well. They rolled it out in one health board, and very quickly, within three, they started it in 3 months. They started it in all the others. So their clinicians have what ours do not. They have a reliable, established, tested infrastructure that meets urgent needs, everyone's needs. That's you and me. When I look at this hall, 12 people in every row will visit a pharmacy in the next year. So it affects all of us. We're all patients at some time or other. We could continue to work towards, this long-term ambition of a single integrated national care record, an ambition that we actually support, but it's years away, and patients can't wait that long. We can't be left behind and left behind and left behind. So our motion calls for a simple, sensible and immediate solution. We adopt a proven system, such as the NHS spine, which was developed in England to bridge the gap. We give pharmacists and other health professionals read-write access to the information they need to keep people safe. We enable digital transmission of prescriptions. You order it and you get told it'll be a week. In England, the doctor writes it and he uses this and he presses a button. And instantly in the pharmacy, it'll flash up that prescription's there. And we dispense it. And it can be, the patient can be in his room and we can have it ready before they can run down the road or push their Zimmer fast enough we can beat them. That's not the way that it works now. We're not asking for something ambitious. We're not asking for something world-leading. We're just wanting a simple solution, one that works. We're asking for something that's obvious, overdue, and essential. And what I'd say is, let's stop asking our clinicians to deliver 21st century healthcare with 20th century tools. Let's serve Scotland's patients better. Let's catch up with the modern world. It's time to act right now and close this dangerous information gap because it does harm people. So I urge Congress to support this motion and urge the STUC to lobby the new government when it comes in to adopt the spine that England uses, because it already exists and it works.
Thanks, Maurice.
Thank you.
Do we have a seconder for the motion, please? Formally, thank you. I'm not seeing any other speakers, so that was motion 42, urgent action on NHS digital integration for pharmacists and other health professionals. General Counsel is recommending support for this motion. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Motion 42, urgent action on NHS digital integration for pharmacists and other health professionals is carried. Now call motion 44, creating a healthier food environment for all in Scotland, standing in the name of the British Dietetic Association.
President Congress, Vicky Bennett, British Dietetic Association, moving motion 44. Congress, Scotland continues to experience unacceptably high levels of diet-related ill health and food insecurity, and this is not evenly distributed. Children, low-income households and disabled people are disproportionately affected, and those inequalities are growing, not narrowing. For many families, healthy food is simply unaffordable. In the UK, low-income households with children would need to spend 70% of their disposable income to afford a diet that meets current healthy eating guidelines. This is not a lifestyle choice, it is a structural failure. This is not about individual responsibility or personal failings. It is about how the food environment we live in, what food is available, how affordable it is, and how heavily it is marketed, and what information people receive. And this powerfully shapes dietary choices and health outcomes. When healthier options are less visible, more expensive and harder to access than ultra-processed, high-fat, high-sugar food, poor health outcomes are inevitable. That is a structural problem and it demands a structural response. This matters to the trade union movement because diet-related ill health is driving inequality, undermining children's development and placing enormous pressure on our public services, particularly the NHS. It matters because good health is fundamental to decent work and because prevention must be valued as highly as treatment. Public health expertise, including the expertise of dietitians, must be central to how Scotland designs and delivers food nutrition policy. Too often, policy is driven by commercial interests rather than health evidence. Creating a healthier food environment is a shared responsibility. It sits with government, local authorities, employers and communities. It must be recognised as fundamental, delivering a healthier, fairer Scotland. This motion calls on the next Scottish Government to commit to expanding free school meals as a priority and expanding free school meals to all primary school children, expand into secondary schools and improve food education in schools more generally through a whole school approach. Secondly, regulating for a healthier food environment. Voluntary approaches have failed, and without regulation, unhealthy food will continue to dominate high streets, online platforms and advertising. We need stronger controls on marketing, promotions and placement, including a code of practice for local authorities to restrict unhealthy outdoor advertising. Thirdly, strengthening food policy through evidence-based standards. Scotland has world-class public health and nutrition expertise, but it must be properly listened to and embedded in policy making. Evidence-based standards protect population health, reduce long-term health costs and ensure consistency across local authorities and public institutions. Fourthly, delivering the Good Food Nation agenda in full. The Good Food Nation has huge potential, but only if it is properly resourced, implemented and held accountable. Delivering it in full means moving beyond aspiration to measurable actions on access, affordability, sustainability and dignity. Dietitians must be recognised as vital contributors to this agenda, supporting local food plans, food education, tackling food insecurity and reducing diet-related illness. And finally, recognising dietitians as essential to a healthier food system. Dietitians are the only regulated healthcare professionals specialising in food and nutrition. They work across prevention, treatment, education and policy, yet their expertise is often underused or overlooked. Recognising and investing in dietitians is an investment in prevention, population health and value for money. Congress, this motion reflects core trade union values in fairness, dignity, prevention and social justice. We must call on a Scotland where food policy prioritises health over profit, and a Scotland where no one is pushed into ill health because nutritious food is inaccessible or unaffordable. I urge Congress to support this motion.
Thanks, Vicky. Do we have a seconder for this motion? Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any speakers, so that was motion 44, creating a healthier food environment for all in Scotland. General Council is recommending support for this motion. So all those in favour? Any against? Abstentions? Motion 44, creating a healthier food environment for all in Scotland, is carried. I now call motion 45, prevention, workforce sustainability and equitable access to allied health professionals services, again standing in the name of the British Dietetic Association.
President Congress, Simon Fever from the British Dietetic Association, proposing motion 45, prevention, workforce sustainability and equitable access to allied health professional services. We cannot stand here today and pretend that Scotland is thriving. We cannot look at the data, look at our communities, look at the lives behind the statistics and say that this is acceptable, because it isn't. Life expectancy has stalled, health is worsening, inequality is widening, and people across Scotland are feeling the consequences every single day. I feel a bit like Sergeant Fraser from Dad's Army saying we're all doomed, so we'll try and make it a bit more upbeat as I go on. Many people have pointed to years of austerity, the shockwaves of the pandemic and the ongoing cost of living crisis as forces that have pushed our communities to the brink. But these pressures didn't fall from the sky, they shaped the reality we are fighting to change. And here's the truth, prevention is not a slogan, prevention is not a line in a strategy document. Prevention is action, it is investment, it is a workforce, it is infrastructure. Without those things, prevention is just a promise that never reaches the people who need it most. Nutrition is one of the most powerful tools we have to prevent illness and reduce inequality. But nutrition doesn't deliver itself. Prevention itself requires a whole range of health professionals, from dietitians to podiatrists, physiotherapists, and occupational therapists, and many more. It takes skilled, committed people who know how to intervene early, support recovery, and keep communities well. And we don't have enough of them at the moment. And yet, too often, access to these services depends on where you live, who you are, how long you can afford to wait, or how much you can afford to pay. And that's not equity. That is not what the people of Scotland deserve. So today we should speak out and demand more. So we call on the Council to press the Scottish Government to expand and diversify routes into AHP professions. Scotland needs more than good intentions. It needs graduate apprenticeships. We need accessible pathways and a workforce that reflects the communities that we serve. We call for proper investment in AHP-led community-based health and social care hubs, real places in real neighbourhoods where diagnostics, treatment and rehabilitation are provided and delivered closer to home, not miles away and not after months of waiting. We call for equitable access to AHP services for every person in Scotland, not as a luxury, not as a postcode lottery, but as a right. Congress, this is not just a policy debate. This is a fight for the future of Scotland's health, a fight for fairness, and I think a fight for dignity. A fight for a system that doesn't wait for people to get sick before it pays attention. We know what works, we know what communities need, and we know that change never comes from silence. So let us speak up loudly, let us speak clearly, and let us demand the investment, the workforce, and the justice that Scotland's people deserve. Please support the motion.
Thank you, Simon. Do you have a seconder for the motion?
Hi, I'm Claire Craig from the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy again. This is an important motion and ask from the healthcare unions at the STUC to support our ongoing work to improve routes into HP professions through apprenticeships and guarantee equitable access to our services for everyone. If you're not yet aware of the Health and Social Care Alliance Scotland, I urge you to visit their pages online and have a look at the work that they're doing. The Alliance is a collaborative of over 20 professional and third sector organisations, including the CSP, who have come together to campaign for a right to rehab in Scotland. In their 2026 manifesto, Our Collective Voice, we call for action to support a right to rehab and a right to palliative care approaches across local and community services. Because let's be clear, our community physio services are stretched beyond capacity. When this happens, services often have to define their boundaries, and in doing so, this can lead to vulnerable service users falling between the cracks, and no one wants that to happen. It's a false economy because people who do not receive our services as part of their preventative health care and rehab often rebound back into services with additional support and care needs for over the subsequent months and years ahead, which puts a burden on our other services and makes that much more difficult to achieve. It's clear we cannot reduce healthcare pressures and create a sustainable health system until everyone gets the community rehab they need. That requires improving equitable access to AHP services as a core part of treatment and recovery pathways, particularly in our stretched community services. So please support. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Do you have any other speakers?
Hi, Congress. I'm Ben Morrison from the Royal College of Podiatry. I wish to support this motion on prevention and equitable access to allied health profession services. Scotland's health is worsening, inequalities are widening, and our NHS is buckling under the pressure. Yet one of the most effective answers to that crisis already exists: early intervention, prevention and timely access to HP services. As a podiatrist, I see daily what happens when prevention is delayed or denied. A foot ulcer that could have been managed early becomes an amputation. A mobility problem left untreated becomes a fall, an admission, a long hospital stay. These are not clinical failures, they are system failures. This motion is right to state that prevention must be matched with investment in workforce planning, not warm words. AHPs are not optional add-ons to healthcare. We are fundamental to keeping people well, independent and out of hospital. Yet access to AHP services in Scotland is riddled with postcode lotteries. Where you live still determines whether you receive timely podiatry, physiotherapy, dietetics or occupational therapy treatments. That is unacceptable in a publicly funded health system. Congress, prevention saves money, but more importantly, it saves dignity, independence and lives. Community-based AHP-led services are exactly how we reduce pressures on acute care, but they only work if they are properly staffed, properly resourced and available to everyone. This motion recognises that truth. It calls for expanded routes in AHP professions, community-based services and equitable access across Scotland. That is the right direction of travel.